It was a crisp October afternoon when I stood on my front porch, clutching a piece of paper that could only be described as absurd. The letterhead screamed "Saw Willow Creek HOA violation notice saw," and in bold red letters, the citation read, "Saw disruptive non-sanctioned laughter in front yard VY OLAT's community decorum standards, Section 14B." Saw, but it was the handwritten scrawl at the bottom, in furious purple ink, that made my blood run cold. Saw joy must be board approved. Further violations will result in severe penalties. Saw across the street. Margaret Hensley stood with her arms crossed, her lips curled into a smug grin, as if she'd just served DVY and e-justice. She had no clue she'd picked a fight with me. Rachel Turner, a CIVYL rights attorney who'd spent years dismantling petty tyrants like her. 2 days earlier, I'd finally settled into my new home in Willow Creek, a picturesque suburban neighborhood I'd chosen after months of house hunting. My old college pals, Tom and Nate, swung by to help unpack, and we were kicking back on the porch, swapping stories about our wild college days. The air was golden, the kind of autumn day that makes you feel alive, and our laughter echoed through the quiet street. That's when I heard Ida Sharp, a vicious knock at my door. I opened it to find Margaret, a woman in her late 50s with a blonde bob so perfect it looked like it was ironed daily. Her navy blazer was crisp, her expression sour. "Excuse me," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "I'm Margaret Hensley, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. Your gathering is VY OLATing our noise ordinance." Tom and Nate exchanged glances and snorted, which only made Margaret's face flush crimson. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice steady, "we're just talking on my own porch." I didn't know normal conversation was a crime. Margaret whipped out a binder thicker than a phone book and flipped to a laminated page. Section 14B explicitly prohibits disturbances, including excessive laughter, loud conversation, or displays of unseemly joy, without prior board approval. The sheer lunacy of her words sent Tom and Nate into hysterics, which, unsurprisingly, didn't help. The next morning, I found a violation notice tucked under my car's windshield wiper, paired with a form titled SAW application for recreational happiness permit SAW. It demanded details like, describe the nature and duration of your joy, and justify why your happiness cannot be contained indoors. I called my neighbor, Evelyn, a sweet retiree who'd lived here for decades, to ask if this was some sick joke. "Oh, honey," she sighed, "Margaret's been at this for years, ever since she became HOA president. She fined the Parkers for a too cheerful birthday party and wrote up little Sammy Klein for giggling in his backyard." Things spiraled fast. Margaret seemed to appoint herself my personal watchdog. Every time I stepped outside, I'd catch her peeking from behind her curtains, camera in hand, ready to document any hint of unauthorized happiness. She snapped photos of me while VYing to neighbors, smiling in my mailbox, even humming while watering my flowers. Each incident brought a new violation notice, each more unhinged than the last. Saw unauthorized contentment during yard maintenance. Failure to maintain facial neutrality during postal retrieval. Suspected premeditation of joy based on observable pep in step. Saw I started a folder for these notices, partly because I couldn't believe they were real, partly because my legal instinct screamed I'd need them. The breaking point came when Margaret called an emergency HOA meeting to address what she called the happiness epidemic in Willow Creek. I walked into the community center to find 30 residents, most looking bewildered or fed up. Margaret stood at a podium, her PowerPoint presentation clicking through surveillance photos of neighbors laughing, smiling, or gestapping content. "Ladies and gentlemen," she declared, "we face a dire threat to our community's dignity. Unchecked joy will tank property values and plunge us into lawless frivolity." When I stood to challenge the notices I'd received, she shut me down cold. "Request denied. Your case is a clear danger to our standards." Other residents tried to speak, but Margaret silenced them with a barrage of procedural nonsense. It hit me then. This wasn't just an overzealous HOA president. Margaret had built her own little empire, and she wasn't about to let reason ruin it. I requested the HOA bylaws and meeting minutes, which Margaret handed over with a scowl. That night, I spread the documents across my dining table, and what I found was equal parts fascinating and infuriating. Over 3 years, Margaret had rewritten the rules to give herself near total control, adding amendments to Police BHA VY, where she deemed inappropriate. She'd created fake committees, appointed herself to every role, and designed procedures to block any challenge. Meeting minutes showed residents raising valid concerns, only to be buried under parliamentary tricks. She'd staged a coup against her own neighborhood. The next morning, another violation notice arrived, this one for SAW displaying defiance at official HOA proceeding SAW. That was it. I'd had enough. I put on my sharpest courtroom suit, grabbed my briefcase, and marched across the street to Margaret's house. When she opened the door, her sneer faltered for a split second. "If you're here to apologize," she said, "I might reduce your fines." I smiled, maybe a bit too smugly. "Actually, Margaret, I'm a licensed attorney specializing in civil liberties and homeowners' rights. I've reviewed your HOA documents, and your enforcement practices are, frankly, illegal." Her face flickered with panic before she snapped. "I don't care if you're the Supreme Court. The rules are the rules, and I have the board's full authority." She tried to slam the door, but I wasn't done. "What you're doing is harassment, invasion of privacy, and possibly criminal surveillance. Your violation notices have no legal basis, and your spying could violate state law." I handed her my business card and watched her go pale. "I'm filing a complaint with the state HOA board and drafting a cease and desist letter for your harassment of residents." That afternoon, I wrote the most satisfying legal document of my career. The cease and desist letter was a masterpiece, citing statutes on homeowners' rights, privacy laws, and HOA limits. I cataloged every absurd violation, every instance of surveillance, every abuse of power. Then I started calling other Tims. Evelyn connected me with the Parkers, who'd been fined due law $300 for their daughter's overly enthusiastic birthday party. The clients shared how Margaret followed their son, snapping photos whenever he played outside. Within days, I had affidavit VYTS from 15 families, all detailing Margaret's reign of terror. The state HOA board was intrigued, especially when I mentioned her surveillance and disregard for procedure. They'd had complaints about Willow Creek before, but lacked evidence now. They also hinted that Margaret's mailbox snooping, reported by several neighbors, might be a federal crime. I suggested they check the community center's security cameras, which had apparently caught some damning footage. 2 weeks later, the storm broke. I was in my home office when I heard cars outside. Peering through my window, I saw 2 police officers and a federal postal inspector at Margaret's door. Minutes later, she was on her porch in handcuffs, shouting about her rights as HOA president. "You don't understand," she yelled, her voice echoing. "I was preserving emotional order for the community's good. These people need structure." The officers calmly explained that her authority didn't extend to rifling through mailboxes for unapproved magazines or confiscating birthday in tatines with too many exclamation points. Security footage and her own meticulous logs complete with notes like "Saw blocked comedy magazine" to Lot 17 Saw sealed her fate. As they led her to the police car, something magical happened. Neighbors poured out of their homes, and a wave of laughter, nervous at first, then bold and defiant, swept through the crowd. It was the sound Margaret had tried to crush for years. The legal fallout was swift. Margaret faced charges of harassment, mail tampering, abuse of authority, and federal postal violations. The HOA board suspended her pending investigation, and residents elected new leadership. The new board's first act was to erase Margaret's rules and pass a Bill of Rights guaranteeing the freedom to laugh, smile, and live joyfully on her own property. At her sentencing, Margaret stood before the judge, a shadow of her former self. Her perfect hair was a mess, her commanding air gone. "Ms. Hensley," the judge said, "you abuse your position to harass residents, violate their privacy, and commit federal crimes in a vendetta against happiness itself. He sentenced her to 18 months in prison, 3 years probation, restitution for illegal fines, and a lifetime ban from any HOA role. As the bailiff led her away, Margaret turned to the courtroom. "Where many of us Saturday you'll see," she cried. "Without oversight, your neighborhood will collapse. You'll beg for order." But no one listened. Instead, the room filled with laughter to kind she'd fought so hard to silence. Margaret's face drained of color, and for the first time, she had nothing to say. What do you think? Did Margaret deserve her fate, or was she just a misguided soul trying to keep order? Should HOAs have the power to control emotions like joy, or is that a step too far? Drop your thoughts below, hit that like button if you cheered when Margaret got her comeuppance, and subscribe for more wild neighborhood tales.